Afternoon, welcome. It's July the 13th, 2023, getting right into those dog days of summer. The Americans in the crowd, or the American baseball fans in the crowd, may have been watching the baseball. I'm next week heading down to Southern California with some kids water polo tournament. I hope to see Shohei Ohtani, the star of America's baseball. He was in the All-Star game last week, didn't get a hit. Anyway, enough about that baseball stuff. It's healthcare. This is THCB Gang. I'm Matthew Holt, founder and publisher of the Healthcare blog. And with me today, policy analyst, author Rosemarie Day from Day Health Strategies, employer benefits with Jen Benz from Siegel Benz, and spicy radiologist from the University of Pennsylvania, Saurabh Jha. Right, everyone, we are here and ready to go. Looking forward to the gang this week. So, it's been, to my mind, a strange week, sort of in health and politics, everything else. We've had, looks like the economy is doing really well, but no one seems to be crediting the current administration. Medicaid seems to be reintroducing work requirements, which I thought were banned by CMS, but apparently seem to be back in vogue. And the stock market, seems to have gone back up. Everything seems to be fine. And we're even seeing a little bit of investment in digital health companies now and again. I've been helping some of them get in front of some venture capitalists, and they're at least alive and taking their phone calls and doing stuff as opposed to where they were a few months ago. But I think we're all still, wondering about when the other shoe is going to drop on a whole bunch of both political and social and health issues. Not to mention, I don't think this group has talked about it, that apparently every American should be on a drug that costs, well, not every American, half of us should be on a drug that costs 12 grand a year to make it sin again. Anyway, so a bunch of stuff randomly going on, but why don't I go around the horn and see what you guys have all been doing? Jen, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Matthew. There is a lot going on. I actually wanted to bring up a topic that is of big interest to me personally right now. And that is, I've shared on the show before, I had cancer when I was 19. So I have this insane amount of diagnostics, and I'm glad we have a radiologist on with us right now. So
this is the only way you can get a consult is to come on.
Exactly. This is my consult. So I have a ridiculous amount of diagnostics that I'm supposed to do all the time. And I'm really, really curious and excited about a couple of these newer companies that have come up with fairly reasonably priced, promising lots of results, like full body scan MRIs with AI is one of them. Another is a blood test that's supposed to pick up 50 different types of cancer, very, very early stage. So really curious about those, and, for myself personally, but then also, are some of these going to actually be disruptive to the market and get enough traction or enough clinical results that they're going to actually really change the way that we screen for cancer. So that's the topic that is top of mind for me right now, and very self-serving.
Yeah, and didn't the guy who made all this money on Spotify just get $65 million to build a whole body PET scanner tool? I don't know. We'll dive into that. Saurabh, I hope you know more about this than I do. This is my own reaction. We'll get back to that. Rosemarie, why don't I go to you next?
Thank you. So I've also been subject to scans, but only in the mammogram category. So I'm very curious to hear more about this. And anyway, I want to pick up on, you kind of blew through the comment that our economy is doing pretty well. You wouldn't necessarily know that to read what the headline news is. And so I have a favorite source of information. I don't know if any of you follow Heather Cox Richardson and her Letters from an American. She's a historian who tries to put more context around the day's headlines, obviously historical context too. And she avoids sensationalism, and I feel like tries to get to like what are the bigger undercurrents that may not be getting the headline attention. So to that end, the one that caught my attention at the end of last week was something that also Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post pointed out, which is that we actually have had 29 consecutive months of job growth, inflation steadily declining, 35,000 new infrastructure projects, an extended period in which real wages have exceeded inflation, and there have been outsized gains for lower wage earners. which all turns into results that have been documented in a working paper by two economists or three economists who said that these policies, which are under the Biden administration, have wiped out a quarter of the inequality that was built in the previous 40 years. And that is a health indicator I look for, because the rising inequality has made all of us sicker, it hits lower income people the hardest, but upper income people are not immune from it. So I saw that as an incredibly positive sign. And sometimes I feel like that's what I like to try to do when I come on the show, is occasionally find something positive.
So Rosemary, there's a great newsletter which I love called Future Crunch. I talk about this for now and again, which it was two Australian guys, and now it's a bunch of Australians, and they basically are looking for the good news across the world. A lot of it's into global public health and renewable energy and that kind of stuff, but they're very much sort of good news, longer term, humanity getting better, less war over time, less disease, less pestilence over time. And I think that and before we get to Saurabh, I just like to make a comment, which is that it's been a little hard to parse apart what is sort of new and doing better in the jobs growth as it is, compared to what's just recovering from what happened post the pandemic, because the pandemic was such a big break, right? We lost so many jobs so quickly. They were replaced obviously with a combination of PPP and direct subsidies to families and what have you. And it did look, and we basically had an experiment with universal basic income, which looked like it did actually work to bring a lot of people out of poverty. But it seems to me now that we're kind of past that. The number of jobs created is now greater than it was before the pandemic. We've had a net new jobs under Biden, and now obviously inflation, which spiked up super high post-pandemic. Then we still ran a zero interest rate policy for the first bit of that. Then we went to heavy interest rates increases, and now are seeing inflation come down rapidly, much more rapidly here, by the way, than in other parts of the world. And varying depending, whether you're talking about gasoline, the energy, or whether you're talking about food. But nonetheless, things look like for a brief period around inequality and wages and everything else, that they seem to be getting much better. And I guess my question is, there are still lots of things that are hanging out there, like with increased student debt, increased car debt, a lot of concerns about commercial real estate and the state of.
Well, I didn't say we wiped out inequality, but we reduced.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this is about is this about as good as we get, or is this a great reset? And obviously, all of that's got to do with politics. We can get into that and the impact of that on health. All right, Saurabh, we lost your picture, so I don't know if you were there, but tell us what you've been looking at. I know the last time I saw you online, you were in Pakistan at the highest road in the world. Was that right? Something like that. Anyway. Saurabh, are you there? There he is.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, we're there.
Oh, excellent. I was just in Ladakh in India at the Indo-Pakistan border.
Yep.
At very high altitude. But I was really looking forward to this for several reasons. One was, how I get really amused by kind of hypocrisy, either from the right or the left, particularly one that ends up backfiring. So how we all thought that Trump was, deranged, unhinged, whatever adjective you want to use for him. Now the Democrats have created somebody that makes Trump seem like Einstein, RFK Jr. RFK Jr. It makes, you wish Trump was in power when you see the possibility of RFK Jr., who is going to go after vaccinations, who is going to go after medical journals. At least Trump had a modicum of respect for doctors. That's why he operated Operation Warp Speed. But RFK Jr., he's a trial lawyer. He's full of self-righteousness, and he has the Kennedy name. And he carries with him an immense amount of dishonesty that comes from, I know this because, my family's from India. We know what dynasties do. They create morons. You had Nehru.
Inbreeding, yeah.
Yeah, you had Nehru, who was very smart, and his daughter was very clever. And then it just got really progressively worse downhill. Now you've got this guy, Rahul Gandhi, who looks like a moron. And, Kennedy's a moron, and he's a moron with a purpose. And here he is giving you an alternative to Trump. And I'm just like laughing. my head off, thinking, wow, you liberals, you brought this on. He is every bit of a liberal. He is like a trial lawyer. He's all about social justice, no matter how bullshit that term is. He's all about, pharma is bad and anything that has any money transaction through capitalism bad. But me, that makes a third of what my poor clients make. We're all good. And you have to be an idiot to believe him. And I'm glad that there are enough idiots. He's a moron. And if democracy gives us the government we deserve this guy. And I'm so glad we have him.
We deserve RFK Jr. I don't know what I don't know what I did in my prior life to deserve him.
Yeah, he's going to make Trump seem like Einstein. And Trump is Einstein compared to him. And this is what you get when you start making shit up about elections. This is who you get. Good. Well done. Congratulations.
The thing about RFK Jr. is that, pretty much funded and coddled by, the extreme right and the Joe Rogan extreme right. There was a whole thing about him wanting to debate the guy from I can't remember the name, the guy from Texas, the pediatrician who built the vaccine. Poderhoff, is that his name? Who built the vaccine? Why wouldn't he go on Joe Rogan and debate him, that kind of stuff? And then he's doing, and he's showing off his body and doing, push-ups and whatever. But somehow he wants to be on the Democratic side of the thing. He's declared as a Democrat, but I mean, you can call him a liberal. He's not really anything. That's all I can tell, maybe.
And let me give a few thoughts on that. Just 1 minute. I think doctors have become lazy. There's this undercurrent that why should we debate RFK Jr. because he's self-evidently a moron. He isn't. He is very clever and he appeals to a large segment of society. He is
you just say he's a moron. You can't say he's a moron and very clever.
No, the people that support him are morons. He himself is very clever. If I said that, let me change that. Let me do a radiologist, addend my report and change that. I think it behooves us to actually debate him. And the fact that we don't means that we're actually scared of him. We need to debate this guy. Public health needs to correct it because he is gaining support exponentially. I might have said too much.
Well, I mean, my sense is that the way American politics is constructed, right? I mean, you can have at this stage, you're now 18 months out before the presidential election. We're 9-10 months before the primaries get serious. That's not, I can't do my math, something like that. Maybe it's 8 months, whatever. You get a lot of stuff that happens, and you do get, last time we had what was that woman's name, Marianne Williamson, who was the sort of space cadet, really loved New Age person on the stage, and you have like 15 other people on the stage who've got no hope of getting elected, who are just putting their name in the ring, and you've got a bunch of those on the Republican side. You've got this guy Vivek Ramaswamy, is that his name, who made all this money from Datavant, and Roy Vant, who's spending $50 million of his own money to become more Trump than Trump. But you've got all this stuff going on. But it's pretty evident that by the time that washes out, either you have somebody who relatively quickly is going to get most of the votes in the primary, and the primaries are going to be done by March, April. So there's going to be no hope that Kennedy's going to win the primary, and at that point, things will be getting more serious about the election as a whole, and the rest of it. And I think it'll go away. So for now, I mean, you can say he's gaining support there, but I mean, it's not going to be serious enough to actually matter. And there's going to be no debates in the Democratic primary. No one official is going to run against Biden. I think it's just going to get brushed away. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somehow there's a wildfire, but because he's on the Democratic side, and most Democrats most Democrats pretend like us that we're sensible and science-driven and think he's crazy. Whether or not he's clever to be crazy, I don't think Kennedy Jr. will get anywhere. And the same thing seems to be true on to me, on the Republican side. Other than the complications of whatever happens with the court cases and whether a convicted felon, which seems to be likely to be the case by the time the first primary comes around, a convicted felon, assuming Trump gets convicted on the documents charges, can actually run and can run in the primaries. It seems to me that it's going to be him or DeSantis. Everyone else seems to be way down in the polls. Maybe something will change, but the rest of the people, the Nikki Haley's and the Tim Scotts and the rest of it, don't seem to have the pull of the recognition with the Republican base. And don't forget, the primaries, you've got to win your base. It doesn't matter what the rest of us think. So I don't think that we're going to see anything dramatically different. I think unless something strange happens, it's unfortunately going to be a rerun of Biden versus Trump, which to me is just bizarre because we now have.
What do you think the odds of a third party candidate are?
Well, I mean, it's hard to see who would run as a third party. We can ask, but who would run as a third party candidate unless Trump doesn't win the Republican nomination? Then I think it's quite high. And then I think in which case the Democrats will win easily because they'll just split the Republican vote. But I don't know. We should ask around. What do we think?
I mean, I would think some of the more moderate Republicans who, might try to capture the Republicans who haven't completely gone crazy.
There aren't enough of those, and they why wouldn't they have done it last time? To some extent they did, right? Kasich tried to run against him the whole way in the primaries. Nobody actually left and said, I'm going to do an independent thing. The last guy who did that was Anderson in 1980. I mean, I know Ross Perot did it from a wackier perspective. It wasn't clear whether Ross Perot was taking votes from Republicans or Democrats. Most people said he was taking equally from either. But even Anderson in 1980 wasn't enough to stop Reagan. So. And Reagan was regarded as being an extremist. Don't forget by everybody in those
right, but he also wasn't a convicted felon. So
but it seems to me, looking at the polling numbers, and I just spent 5 minutes, getting trolled by about 1,000 right-wing nut jobs in Florida on Twitter because I gave $10 to Rebecca Jones, who is instantly pretty crazy herself. But I wanted to see her. She's going to make a movie about. She's the woman who got fired from a public health job in Florida, and it's pretty it's pretty questionable herself. But my God, I got piled on by like 1,000. I just spent this morning blocking about 1,000 mad right wingers from Florida on Twitter. There's a lot of craziness around outside, but I don't see enough. Maybe we do to see who would be a viable third-party candidate who actually would carry it to the point where they would actually actively go at the Republicans. Now, maybe the no labels people, or maybe Kennedy will run as a third-party candidate and do kind of what the Greens did to Gore, to some extent to Hillary Clinton. You could argue that a small third party, but I don't think a significant third party you could take a significant chunk of the voters of the major party is on the horizon, but. Who knows?
It doesn't have to be a significant chunk, though, to really influence the way the election pans out, because so many states are so tiny in the margins.
I mean, you go back to, I remember 2000 very well. Was it Nader got like 4,000 votes in Florida for the Green Party? And you can imagine Cornel West is going to run for some party or other. And apparently, it's a pro-Russian candidate, anti-Ukrainian.
Well, also, and Jill Stein, if those folks who voted for Jill Stein had voted for Hillary, she would have won.
Yeah, it is a great. I mean, and of course the state by state nature of the whole issue means that you don't have the rationale. A million people in California can vote for one person or the other, and no one cares. Anyway, but I think Saurabh thinks this is all part of the decay of Western civilization. Is that right, Saurabh?
I tend to view these things as cyclical, and like Hegel said. You have a force, you have a counterforce, you have a result of that. And RFK Jr. to me is the result of a lot of idiocy. He's like the end product of it. How you can distill something and you get something really good. When you distill the idiocy, you get RFK Jr. So about something else earlier on, about all this information that's coming from these companies that are giving out whole body MRIs. It may surprise you for me to say that I think that this is total waste of money. And the reason it's waste of money is because it's been done before. We've had whole body CTs, whole body MRIs, whole body, you name it. And the problem here is that it's not that we'd never find something occasionally helpful. We do. And what happens is they tend to be anecdotes that are very positive. The problem is that we find stuff that what is called overdiagnosis, things that look bad but don't behave badly, and you have no choice but to go after them aggressively. That really don't make much of a difference. I mean, books have been written on this. And I think if you're going to have something, and what happens these days is if you say powered by AI, it automatically makes it seem as if, Laplace is a demon. This whole encompassing, I know everything is on board, but it's not. AI is simply operating on the same parameters that we are, which is that it finds a few things that could be relevant in a sea of irrelevance. So I'm not terribly excited. I don't know who these venture capitalists are and how they put in $65 million. If they really want to waste their money, they should just fund my extravagant global travels. At least they'll get a story out of it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a total waste of money and I can't see it doing much. If I'm wrong, I will happily eat shit, my own, preferably.
Okay, we're not doing that live on this channel, is all I can say. Jen, can you say a bit more about what you were looking at? I mean, the only one I saw that's new is the Spotify one. There is one that one of my VC friends was recommending around that I should go and get done. I mean, part of the issue here is again, it's who's getting this, right? I mean,
Right.
I have no history of cancer, and well, there's no early, younger than my age of 60 and then nearly 60 in my family. I mean, it seems to me that I might pick stuff up that might happen in my 70s and 80s. I don't really care. Whereas someone like you, in fact, you too, Rosemarie, who obviously had cancer much younger in life, that may be more useful. So can you say a bit more about what you've been looking at and what you're excited about, or what you think, how you think it's playing out?
Yeah, there are two that have really caught my eye. And another friend of mine who has gone through cancer treatments in her 40s and has a really intense family history of cancer has pointed a couple of these out to me. One is Prenuvo, which is this full body MRI, and they say that it's analyzed by AI. You can go directly to them for it, so I don't even think you have to have a doctor recommend it. And then they get you connected with their physicians to do the analysis. And then the other one is a company called Grail, and they have a blood test called Gallery that supposedly can pick up 50 different types of cancer fairly early on. And it's just a blood test. And then if there's anything that's off, you're sent for additional testing. The blood test is $1,000, which sounds expensive to start with, but not as soon as you compare it to all of the diagnostics that I do every year. So yeah, so those are the two that caught my eye. Both of them my naturopath knew about and was starting to get information on. So super interesting.
So Prenuvo sounds to me very similar to the one from the Spotify guy. And I've actually, Prenuvo, a venture capitalist friend of mine, keeps saying he's got me a deal where I can go get it, and he's had it done. And he's not an irrational person. And there's a similar company that Craig Ventnor was behind, although they were suing him and he was suing them, even though he was the CEO. I got records called Human Genetics, where they had a whole series of deep testing. And they say, "Oh, we're finding stuff that gets missed," but I agree with Saurabh. In general, this brings up I think these bring up for most people a massive amount of false positives, and that's probably you end up having a ton of work. And if you go back, Rosemarie, to the mammogram issue, right? The whole US presented task force thing is, what's the damage done by excessive false positives from mammograms compared, what age should we start routinely pursuing mammograms? I forget. Saurabh, you probably know what the current guideline is. Is it 45 or keeps on going up and down? And there's always questions, and you always find somebody who was a little bit younger than the guideline who died of cancer or found they had it too late or whatever. So
guidelines are 40. I think they're 40 again, if I'm not mistaken. Right. I think the USPSTF has gone back to 40, and quite honestly, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
I mean, given what you're trying to achieve here, it makes sense that you want to get the youngest women who have the most to lose in terms of the life expectancy. Makes much more sense than getting people in their 70s. There'll always be questioning at the thresholds. You can say 40, why not 39? If you said 39, you'd say why not 37? But thresholds are like that. They're always going to be arbitrary, and there's always going to be it won't make sense at the threshold. But given what they're trying to achieve with screening for breast cancer, I think if anything, the younger the better, because they have much more to lose. And it's not just them. I mean, these are young moms whose kids lose as well. So the economic effect of a young woman dying of breast cancer is tremendous. I personally don't believe in screening. I think that it's not, you should focus on people who have disease, but if you're going to screen, it doesn't make sense screening 80-year-olds. It makes more sense screening 40-year-olds.
I agree with that. The other one that you mentioned there, Jen, is Grail, which it's hard to parse apart what's going on between Illumina and Grail on a sort of business basis, how effective the test is. Just worth noting on the business basis that all kinds of weird things happen, right? In the Illumina spun Grail out, then bought it back. There's a lot of criticism of the Illumina board for how they did that and how much, and whether the CEO of Illumina had enough stock in Grail that he was basically paying himself off. And there's a whole bunch of controversy about that. Meanwhile, they closed the deal before they got regulatory approval in Europe. They just got fined $475 million for doing that, which was, adds considerably the cost of what they paid for Grail. So I don't know how effective, it has been a business. But I guess the question is, how effective is the test itself, right? Is it really able to basically get rid of a whole bunch of other cancer tests for people like you? Or is it, as most stuff in healthcare is, the idea where, well, we're just going to give this test to a lot more people who perhaps don't need it and essentially use it as a screening test, the same way that Saurabh says he doesn't believe in screening, we should go after people who are actively sick. So I don't know. Jen, have you had the test?
No, but I think I might get it just out of curiosity.
Right.
Yeah.
Saurabh, Rosemarie, do you have a sense of if there is something going on? Number one, is there kind of a replacement of perhaps other screening and radiology tests with a blood test like a Grail? And or is the use of it growing faster than it might otherwise be, that it ought to be growing? Or is this a sea change, or is this just a, what's your impression of it?
Should I take it first?
Yeah, please do.
I feel like
you're our token doctor on the panel today, so we expect that all medical knowledge is filtering through you.
No, I think broadly speaking, you can think of it in two ways. First is what's called specificity, which is that if somebody really, really has disease, then a test, if it's there, you can't ignore it. And the other is sensitivity, which is if somebody may have disease, if the test is negative, you can say, I can be very happy about it. The two, unfortunately, don't go hand in hand in the sense that the test is either very specific or very sensitive. So we've had a lot of stuff in cardiovascular disease, for instance, which have looked at inflammatory markers with the hypothesis that in people who get heart attacks, there's a component of inflammation, and there is. So if you have, for instance, an elevation of certain markers, they correlate very well with heart attacks. Problem is that not everybody who doesn't have that inflammatory marker doesn't have a heart attack. So you've got this pool of people that have no evidence of inflammation, at least on blood tests, that can still get it. So instantly you've missed this whole cohort. So if your job is to catch people by using this particular blood test, you're not going to do that. Well, then you might say, okay, well, let's catch people anyway. Now the problem occurs is a different problem where you throw the net so wide that you catch people. It's almost like collateral damage who aren't going to have a heart attack in the first place. And I don't think there's any real way of reconciling these two. It's almost a sense of if you want more of one, you're going to get less of the other. And I'm not sure that any of the current stuff is beating this trade-off. I think if anything, it's augmenting it. I certainly haven't come across anything in radiology that kind of beats it. I'll give you one example before I conclude. AI is supposed to help you detect more stuff. And what AI does, at least in mammograms, is it helps you find cancers quite a bit. But at the same time, it flags a lot of false positives. So much so that radiologists shut AI off, like they say, shut the hell up. Because if you don't, I'm just going to keep getting this notification that this could be cancer, but I know for sure it won't be. So that's the sort of trade-off that you have with these diagnostic tests.
Is there a feeling / a reality that we're going to see more and more? I mean, assuming, and this is a big assumption, that diagnostic tests like a Grail get cheaper over time, which may or may not be the case. But blood tests get cheaper, and I'm not saying we're all going to end up with the Theranos idea of getting everything from one prick of a finger, but over time we'll be able to tell more stuff from more screening at a lower and lower cost, compared to the presumably more expensive cost of having radiology tests, imaging tests, and requiring expensive people like you to read them. I'm exaggerating here, but is there a sense that we're moving diagnosis from professional based to technology based, or is that something that I'm making up?
No, you're not making it up. There is certainly that trend, and it's actually very prevalent in places like India, which is in remote places, which doesn't have radiologists. Forget doctors; they don't even. Forget radiologists; they don't even have doctors. But what you're going to do there is you're going to take an industrial test that is easy to administer, and that gives you a rapid answer, and that you're going to hope. But it's not going to be terribly specific if it can be easily scaled. An example of a test that can easily be scaled, for example, is a chest X-ray that looks for TB. If you're really going to say that I'm going to be so sensitive that any factor that can lead to TB, I'm going to detect, then it's easy to democratize that. The difficulty is when you really say, okay, does this patient actually have TB? Tell me, otherwise I'm going to shoot your brain off. That doesn't happen with radiologists. We just get paid money, so our brain will shut off. But you understand what I mean, that if the answer is easy, it can be scaled. If the answer is difficult, it becomes difficult to scale.
And do you know about Grail in particular? Is that are you sensing that it's, if you go to the point where you say a full body PET scan or MRI scan is essentially screening false positives and most people shouldn't get it, a la de novo, or I need to look up the name of the one from the Spotify guy. Do you sense that the Grail test is somewhat similar to that, or do you think it's more, from what you've heard, is it more useful?
I can't give you the specifics. I haven't looked into it. I can tell you that there have been stuff in the past that have looked at blood tests for cancer. And again, you've had the same issue with sensitivity versus specificity and overdiagnosis as well. Overdiagnosis is when you find something that could be cancerous, but it ends up being that if you had not found it, the person would have lived just as long. It's very hard to know that at the point of finding out. You have to wait like 30 years to be sure that that's the case.
And that's
So,
oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say that's a big challenge right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for what it's worth, I found the Spotify guy, Daniel Ek, who's still the CEO. It's his company. It's a 5-year-old company called Nico Health, founded by people with unpronounceable Scandinavian names, ending in Nielsen. And they've got a comprehensive 3D body scan inside a booth, blah, blah, blah. Can't tell whether it's laser scans, EKG, God knows what else. And they've done 1,000 scans. 80% of the customers are prepaid for a follow-up scan. Costs $300, which sounds quite cheap compared to some of this other stuff. who knows? It sounds to me that right now it's a rich person's plaything. But I mean, they've got funding from Lakestar, Atomico, and General Catalyst, so it's not completely crazy. It's not the guy just spending his own money. So I wonder, and it becomes one of those things that becomes trendy for people to do. Like you're bored of doing whatever, so it's some discretionary spending for rich people, rather than. But I'm with Saurabh on the issue of that. In general, we're overdiagnosed and overtreated in the US, at least for many conditions, and a lot of this stuff goes away. And frankly, my experience last fall, with my back issue was really one of those cases where I was in tremendous pain. I thought I had something awful. I went and had an MRI by the emergency room because I'd spent my deductible. I'd already spent the deductible, so it didn't cost me anything. And it was the easiest way to get an MRI. And well done, Marin General. They made, or Marin Health as it's now called. They made a lot of money out of Blue Cross for Blue Cross Massachusetts. Sorry, Rosemarie, for bumping up your rates in Boston for doing that. And the MRI came back, and although the initial emergency room doctor told me I had 2 herniated discs, when I got read by a radiologist and read by people who knew what they were looking at, they went, "Yeah, this guy's all right for a 59-year-old man." Basically, it wasn't too bad. And I steadily recovered. Now, was it a total waste of time and money? I did end up getting, an injection, a steroid injection, which was guided by the scan, and probably told me that I was ruled out as being one thing and ruled into being another thing, ruled into being a facet joint irritation on the nerve rather than being a herniated disc. So I mean, you could argue backwards and forwards, but I was in tremendous amount of pain and I wanted to deal with it. So it wasn't a preventative scan of a healthy person. I certainly had issues going on, but I mean, did I really need it when I look back at it? I'm not entirely sure, but a lot of healthcare dollars got spent on it. So there we go. Anyway, fantastic. Rosemarie, can we move to your issue about changing topics completely to the one you raised about, we got there a little bit at the start, about what you think the impact of lowering inequality is going to be on health and kind of where we are. You did say a little earlier that, I'm not saying inequality is over, and clearly inequality is not over, especially we've just been discussing rich people having, $1,000 MRIs or whatever for preventative care, whereas there are still people in America who don't have enough to eat and what have you. But could you just riff a little bit on what you think we've learned, and also to some extent whether any of that is percolated into the more general politics and general, and general sort of zeitgeist of how people are thinking about these issues. But let's start with what you think we've learned from spending that has been on reducing inequality and the growth in low income.
I mean, there are a bunch of pointy-headed policy wonks. I certainly live in a region of the country that has a number of them that are very focused on studying inequality. And it's not just economists, it's sociologists, it's really cross-cutting. So there are people who are learning from this. But to your question of, is it like permeating the political psyche? I don't think so. So I'm glad that when I go to conferences and stuff, I am hearing more speakers talk about I put some of this research into my book about the ill effects of inequality across the economic spectrum, because studies have been done comparing the US, at different class levels, health standard, and versus like the UK or other places that have less inequality. And I think Americans
the UK is fast catching up. Mostly by making which poorer people much poorer, but that's a secondary issue.
But you still have universal health care. Well, where are you? UK still has universal.
In Marin County, we're all communists.
Yeah, I know. But where are you oriented? Metaphorically. So there's increasing awareness amongst certain circles compared to like when I started in this field, but it still hasn't like permeated the broader zeitgeist. So it certainly comes up time and again in the work I'm doing on health equity or the inequities, health disparities. And we talk about, there's a race aspect, but there's also a class aspect. So, and that it's beyond what is the healthcare system doing. It has so much to do with the economy and others and social support. So that's very common in the circles I'm in, but again, it's just not common knowledge. So
well, I mean,
it's time to talk about it today.
I mean, one thing that's worth mentioning, right, is you've got this different sort of, a lot of different things going on in the zeitgeist. So one of the things, and Saurabh brings up RFK Jr., and I say, yeah, it's a little drama that goes on the year before an election. We have crazy stuff happens, and it kind of gets sorted out until you get 2016, where Trump actually, gets a majority of his party to go along with the crazy. But as Saurabh says, he's a genius and not crazy compared to RFK Jr. So on the other hand, you have long-running, countervailing effects. So I think there is a lot of understanding, and there's some discussion, certainly from the current administration, that inequality is down, that if we can do industrial policy, and a lot of this is geopolitics, right? We want to build semiconductor chips here, electric cars, and electric solar panels and whatever, electric renewable energy and solar panels here, because we're damn scared the Chinese are going to invade Taiwan and cut us off, right? And 30 years of not even diversifying the supply chain, putting our supply chain into China has now got super scary for all people, right? Which is why you're seeing companies like Apple build plants not only here but also in India and Vietnam and elsewhere, and sort of diversify away from China, because we're now very scared about what the Chinese are going to do and their alliance with Putin and blah blah blah. So
right.
I think you've got that thing happening, but Biden is saying, and he's on a tour now, and Harris is on a tour saying, we're building from the middle out, the bottom up and the middle out. We're changing the middle class. We've had 30 years of income inequality. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to build union labor in the states. Blah blah blah. To me, that is different. You're starting to see that. You're starting to see. Obviously the Inflation Reduction Act, which as far as I can see had nothing to do with inflation, even though inflation has gone down the last 30 years.
Well, the CHIPS Act, with all the infrastructure.
Yeah, but the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure, the Inflation Reduction Act is, largely an infrastructure act. It was a continuation of the Affordable Care Act. It was a big infrastructure act for renewable energy and some other stuff, right? And then eventually we had drug price negotiation, which may or may not actually be, but hasn't happened yet. So it certainly hasn't impacted inflation yet. But if it does, even though the government, the pharma companies are suing the government over this. But to go back to that, that's kind of getting in the zeitgeist. But honestly, the amount of noise you hear about in politics about it is drowned out by either the RFK Jr. sort of show or the Trump stuff, right?
Because it's like people want to watch Real House. I mean, it's sensational stuff. But thinking about health, think about political health. I was just overseas, and when you're in Europe, it's like, oh my God. I mean, the Ukraine situation, I feel like it's just much more palpable there because it's in the same territory. Like we in the U.S. have an ocean between us, and it reminds me of like the buildup to World War II, where it's like America could be isolationist until finally we weren't, but it took an awful long time to get over that hurdle to do the right thing, frankly, for going up against Hitler. And I think about that now with Putin, and so that's on Biden's mind all the time. So reducing inequality also helps take away some of the seeds of the political extremism that allow authoritarians to sort of take over, because there's this desperation amongst folks who've been left behind and they'll succumb to these messages that are incredibly negative, incredibly racist, all the things that happen to the Jews. I'm just thinking about how that all ties together, and there's a health to our politics that is very much connected to our economic inequality. And so reducing that, I think, it helps health across multiple spectrums.
On the other hand, I think that is kind of more central to the zeitgeist. You have the craziness and the far right around Trump and DeSantis and all this other stuff, and all the people who I met on Twitter last night and blocked this morning. So my timeline comes back to clarity and sanity. But you then have the vestiges of what did happen, right, with the Supreme Court, and now last week affirmative action was struck down at sort of higher end. I see them across the board, but at higher end colleges, UNC and Harvard, and that struck me as being an interesting thing that the symbolism of more African Americans and others minorities being able to go to Harvard and UNC is great, but the number of people who can go to Harvard or UNC anyway is very, very limited.
It's de minimis. We really should be looking at community colleges,
Absolutely.
colleges, and the whole pipeline that really actually helps people get decent paying jobs in greater numbers.
Right. I mean, I think that's the bit which seems to be, we're arguing about in some senses the wrong thing, and a lot of this stuff is symbolic and the rest of it. But I don't know if what you said at the start, right, which is there's an economist I follow called Justin Wolfers, who I think is now in Michigan. I think it might have been at Penn at one point with you, Saurabh, but not with you in the same city, in the same zip code. Who, funnily enough, was my tenant for about 5 minutes when I bought an apartment in San Francisco, and he was living in it with his then wife. And I was always a bit nervous about buying a house which already had a tenant in it, and I said, am I sure you're going to move? And he said, yes, I have a tenure track position starting in a month at University of Pennsylvania. You just need to give me a month to get out. So I assume that was a better bet than just, staying as a squatter in my apartment. And fair enough, he moved out in a month and all the rest of it. But, he follows this a lot and has, when you follow him on Twitter, there's a lot of information about the change in low wage, increase in low wage earners. And obviously we have a lot of available jobs. And again, they're not a McKinsey consultant or investment banker vacancies, right? These are service workers, drivers. The local supermarket where I work cannot get enough people for love nor money. It's that kind of stuff that's available, and those wages have been depressed relative to others across the economy for 30, 40 years, and now they're starting to creep back up. It's not exactly, they're not exactly back to where where they were in relative speak in the 60s and 70s, compared to high earners then. But nonetheless, I think you're right. It's starting to come back, and hopefully that's something that the zeitgeist continues. But I'm with you. It seems to me that has knock-on effects into the healthcare system. Obviously, a couple of things. One is employment is obviously connected to health insurance. And so as you see more people being kicked off Medicaid, some of this is being picked up by the fact you can get a job with healthcare attached to it. And the other thing, as you said, is that inequality itself is an indicator of poor health up and down the sex spectrum, but especially for people at the bottom of the totem. So I mean, to me, that's something that doesn't get stressed enough, and it's also hard to talk about it, in the way that we like to focus on one particular thing, whether it's RFK Jr. or some guy raising billions of dollars for his own MRI, whole body scan thing, because it's a long, slow thing, right? It's
data, stuff like that.
I'm curious, Rosemarie, with some of those positive indicators, there's a lot of headlines about maternal health still declining and maternal mortality still becoming a bigger issue. What is your read on that?
I think there's a lag effect to some extent, and I also think there's just been a lot more attention, again, looking at health disparities and the maternal health indicators, thanks to folks like Kamala Harris and others who are really, really amplifying the attention on that data. So I think there's some of that too happening. Better data collection and amplification of the message.
It's also actively, and some groups like African American women, getting worse, right? It's not getting. I mean, it's a question of dog bites man or man bites dog, whatever. People noticing that happening versus, I think the trends are actually getting worse, aren't they? In some cases.
Well, the trends are definitely not good for Black women in America, and they've always been worse than other racial and cultural demographic groups. But I've seen some headlines that the trend is actually downward for all groups. And so I think it depends on which data you look at and, kind of what part of the country and so forth. But some things are pointing the wrong direction for all groups of women. And I think when we see what's happened with the abortion access being restricted,
That's it.
some of these states, some of the states where doctors won't even see women in their first trimester of pregnancy anymore, that we're going to see that impact over the next couple of years.
Well, that and that OBGYNs who are in training are not going to want to be located in states where the politics around this are dicey, because they face too much liability. It's going to have devastating effect in a number of areas of our country.
Yeah, that was an interesting article written by a German journalist wandering across America for the Spiegel, which I saw this week, which interviewed the last remaining OBGYN provider of abortion care in Idaho. And he's now saying that, it's now the point where if somebody comes in and they have a baby, they have some tremendous problem, it's sort of 16 to 18 weeks of pregnancy, he can't do anything about it until it's actually directly a threat to their health. And, lots of bad stuff is starting to come, and, but he's thinking moving. And, that this is going to, like I said, there's lots of countervailing trends going on. So, the Obama was always saying, the arc, was it Obama or was it the guy in the West Wing? Just so Barrett was saying, the arc of America always bent toward, was always getting better, but seems to be there are multiple different arcs, right? Depending where you are.
It's the Martin Luther King quote, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. That's what a lot of us hold out hope for.
And the answer is it depends, right?
But it does. And my point is, it doesn't bend on its own. It takes a lot of work.
And it doesn't bend, and it doesn't bend consistently. There's progress and then backlash, and improved results, decreased results. It goes up and down on that arc.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask the two of you, because I know you're both fans, and maybe get Saurabh's opinion here. So if we go into the election process, you mentioned Kamala Harris, Vice President. There's been a lot of back and forth, mostly back rather than forth, about her role and what she's done. If you're really inside politics junkies, she's been fairly involved in the foreign affairs part. She's been doing as much as, well, not as much as, but she's certainly been visible compared to Secretary of State Blinken in some of the negotiations around Ukraine and NATO and what have you. And I don't know if that's an effort by the administration to raise her visibility. She's been heavily criticized for, stuff that I thought was trivial. So, for example, she said some things in a meeting, introducing a meeting where there were disabled people, either at the meeting or elsewhere, which she was mocked for on right-wing Twitter and what have you. There's a lot of conversation about how she's not broken through. She didn't do very well in the primaries back in 2020. And, we're going to go into an election where the main guy is 80 in the election. Is he 80 yet, or in the election year is going to be 81? But right, Biden is clearly getting on, whether or not he's has normal moments for an 80-year-old, or whether he's going senile or what, whatever. The answer is you're going to hear a lot of that rhetoric. So just before we go, I'd love to get our feeling about what you think the state of play with Harris is, and whether we think it's going to make a big impact one way or the other over the next 18 months. Because I think a lot of us thought that when Biden first showed up and, took this thing over as being the only guy who could get rid of Trump and unify the Democrats and get all the different constituencies together and deal with the Bernie Sanders thing and all the rest of it. I mean, I had the joke that there was a time when he was on stage with Sanders, Biden, and Bloomberg. And I joked that if Bill Clinton had been on stage, he'd have been the fourth youngest guy on the stage. So, I know you two are fans. Give me a sense about how you think she's doing and what the impact on that's going to be on the politics of the next year and a half.
If you've ever seen her in person, seen her, speak, she is very vibrant, likable. I mean, incredible sense of humor, and also can pivot to being completely serious. I've seen her speak about the foreign policy, the trips she's taken. she's quite a tour de force. I find her to be remarkable. And then it's also remarkable, why doesn't she get more positive press? It's just, I attribute it to, you know, a number of things, but including ongoing racism and misogyny, because she's just, I think she's wonderful.
Jen, Saurabh, your opinion on how it's going to play out?
I don't have any predictions on how it'll play out, but I agree with Rosemarie. I think that she gets a lot of bad press for the same reason that all women leaders get a lot of bad press, and they get a lot of critique for what they wear, or, you know, really small things, and not a lot of praise for what they really do. And there's a really interesting study that came out just I think a month and a half ago about how women in leadership roles are criticized for pretty much everything. Like, you're too old, you're too young, you're too pretty, you're not pretty enough, you're too skinny, you're not skinny enough. I mean, just like every single critique that women in any sort of leadership role face. And I think there's a lot of that in how she's portrayed and how people think about her.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I was highly surprised about how poorly she did in the primaries, you know, and she quit before they started, basically, and also how poorly I'm blanking on it. The black senator from New Jersey, Christ, help me with his name.
Oh, Cory Booker.
Right, Cory Booker did. Given you know, and the fact that Claiborne from South Carolina basically gave his mandate to Biden rather than to one of his fellow black senators was interesting, I thought, but there we go. Saurabh, you could probably have a more jaundiced view on this. How do you think this is going to play? I'm assuming. How do you think this is going to play out in the next year's election?
Lose friends if I answer, but I feel
No,
like
you can lose friends. They'll forget about it by the time you're on the show again next.
Well, you know, Matthew, you and I don't think we're that far apart in terms of our age. Maybe a few years.
Surely I'm much older than you.
You grew up when Del Trotter used to say, "This time next year we're going to be millionaires." I presume.
I don't remember being a millionaire, but one day.
Well, I grew up with 3 female heads of state in my conscience. One was Margaret Thatcher,
Sure.
who I must like very much, but I respected tremendously. The other was Indira Gandhi from India, who had a lot of bad press initially. She was sort of being a bimbo, and then she essentially manipulated the Congress party, and everybody was like, "Oh my God." She was called a gungi guria, which means a doll that has no brain. But she proved that she wasn't. And the third was Benazir Bhutto, who was assassinated. And Bhutto and Gandhi were obviously from low middle income countries, what you'd call the third world, but they were females leading a country. I have to say that Kamala Harris is not even a patch on them. She's airhead. When she speaks, she makes me cringe. When Margaret Thatcher spoke, she irritated me, but I had respect for her. When Indira Gandhi spoke, I thought, oh my God, I really want to kill her, but I had respect for her. And when Benazir Bhutto spoke, a lot of her speeches against India, again, I had the same feeling, but there was respect. And Kamala doesn't seem to do that for me. I mean, when she speaks, I just think of, wow, it's better she shuts up. So I disagree with the 2 that have just spoken about her. I think she's an airhead. It's got nothing to do with her gender, nothing to do with her race. She's just particularly stupid.
Oh.
And compared
Wow. I 100% agree with you, but there it is.
Compared to the female leaders that I have that I grew up with, who I didn't particularly like, I must admit. You know, Mrs. Thatcher introduced poll tax that really hurt me. She increased my student loans. But when she spoke, there was a modicum of respect. I mean, if I was ever misogynist, it'd be like, oh, wow, this person is speaking good shit. Same with Indira Gandhi and same with Benazir Bhutto, who brought India and Pakistan to war. So I can tell you that compared to the female leaders that I've been used to, Kamala is an idiot, a really big one. And I'm sorry to say that. When she speaks, she sounds like an airhead. And it's got nothing to do with her race or gender. She is just stupid. And I know that you're going to disagree with me.
I'm going to disagree with you. But
There are
I
many
would,
people in the Democrat Party who should take the lead there. She's a liability. And the problem, of course, is there are other liabilities who are bigger liabilities than her, like RFK Jr. and Trump and Biden himself to some extent, if we can get to the bottom of his Alzheimer's. But it's really poor show. It's poor show from the United States. It's poor show from a country that champions female rights. And here you are, India and Pakistan, and even Bangladesh, producing female leaders that will take these women to town with their intellect and their sophistication. So forgive me for saying, if I have great admiration for female leaders, Kamala ain't one of them.
well, I'd point out that the female leaders you talk about, all of them took their countries to war in very dubious circumstances. A lot of
I didn't
stuff
say that.
that they may
I
have
didn't
appeared
say that.
formidable to you, but they didn't necessarily the outcomes were that great. So I think
Well,
we
didn't
may
say
have to
it
leave
was
that.
perfect.
I would say, much as I completely disagree with you, Saurabh, about Kamala Harris and for that matter, Thatcher and Gandhi, the rest of it. I don't think, I think your view is relatively commonly shared, and I think it's a PR problem that the Democrats have to deal with. Having said that, if she was, if you compare it to what's going on the other side, Kerry Lake is about to become the vice presidential candidate. I don't know your opinion of that would be. Right.
If you're going to ask me, is she better than Nikki Haley? I think that's a pretty low bar. Yes, the answer is she is.
I wasn't even going as high as Nikki Haley.
But
Kerry Lake.
that's a very low bar.
I know we're at time, but
We're at time, but you can do a rebuttal, Rosemarie, before I say.
I've already said I'm 100% against what you just said, Saurabh, with all due respect, but there you go.
Saurabh's model, don't forget, is that Indian TV where they just shout at each other and being wrong. Sorry,
I was curious about Threads, and if you've had any commentary on that in the previous weeks of this.
No, I think the Threads thing in terms of moving off Twitter, has just started, and obviously it grew very quickly. It was very easy because you just start your Instagram account. I couldn't figure out how to change my name from Matthew Holt, the Baldy Boy.
I know, I saw that on your thing.
I struggle with that. I think I can figure out a way to change my Instagram account, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. Threads annoys the crap out of me because you can't use it on the web. It's mobile only, which is okay for the kids, but for old men like me who like sitting on a big screen, it's tricky. I don't know. It's to me, Twitter was, for all its craziness pre-Musk taking over, for all the stuff that happened, and either the lack of banning or the excessive banning, depending where you believe, of people who were trolling and doing misinformation, was an incredible utility that had economic utility much greater than its capacity to make money, and was never properly managed by the people who did manage it. And then Musk did this idiotic thing where he just went and paid way too much for it, and so the board said, "Great, we'll take your money, you idiot. We'll sue you into buying it for us." And he wasted 20 to 30 billion more than he should have paid for it, or whatever the number was. But now it seems to be, falling apart. What upsets me, and I'm sure, those of us who've been active on Twitter over the years, and not that I'm any giant, but I have, 60,000 followers between the healthcare blog account and my Baldy Boy account, which is enough. And, to go to Threads where you have like 7 people following you, or one of these others, kind of like I'm just destroying not only the community and the reach that we had, but also, sometimes I go back and say, "Oh, I tweeted about this like 6 years ago," and I can go find it and like find something that I've forgotten about. There's a health policy Valentine's tweet where me and Lisa Sinema, which I bring up every health policy Valentine. I go search it and find it and go, "That was a funny thing we did." And if it dies, it dies. But this is the problem with having a mass private essential utility controlling all your data where you don't control it. You can download all your tweets, but so what? Some of your Facebook stuff, but so what? And we discovered, those of us who were very utopian about how great all this community online was going to be and how it's going to make us smarter and cleverer, and all the good information would drive out the bad information and all that stuff back in the 90s and the early 2000s have been proven not entirely correct.
Yeah.
All right.
Not entirely.
Musk has been a total disaster.
I mean,
I don't know what the hell he's aiming for, but he's really created this army of dimwits that he's given a blue check to. So it's even hard to discern. In fact, it's kind of like reverse. Now, if you have a blue chip, blue tip, a blue check, you know that the person's likely to be an idiot. But the problem is, I think it's going to be very hard for any other group to rival Twitter because there's already so much history over here.
Mhm.
And I think it's just going to be very difficult for Threads to compete. For in sickness and in health, this is what we have. I mean, we just have this Twitter, and we just have to hope that that Musk's ego at some point diminishes, and he realizes that he's just created this army of dimwits on it.
Perhaps he gets bored, but I'm hopeful. All right,
I'm hopeful too.
we are well over time, so I'm gonna cut us off there. This has been the THCB gang. You've been listening. I'm Matthew Holt, your founder and publisher. You've been listening to Rosemarie Day from the sweltering heat of Boston. Jen Benz from the very cool San Francisco. This is probably cooler there than it is up here in Marin County where I live. And Saurabh Jha from, I know, I've seen Pennsylvania's roasting as well. That was THCB gang for July the 13th. Next week, we have another THCB gang. I believe I have a special episode, or maybe no, it's the week after, so I can't claim the special episode for next week. There will be another one next week. I'll be broadcasting from Southern California, where I have the joy and pleasure of watching a bunch of 12-year-old girls play water polo for 4 days in a row. Just what I anticipated my life would be like.
Very exciting.
With that, I will look forward to seeing everyone next week. I want to thank my guests. Thanks everyone for watching and listening, and we shall see you soon.